She didn't need promises or pretty words, just someone who'd stay long enough to prove silence could mean care. The cafe was half empty that evening, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel sharper, the faint clink of cups, the soft hum of rain outside, the muted jazz playing from an old speaker near the counter. I had come to escape the noise of the world, but instead, I found her, sitting by the window, alone, like she belonged to the rain. She wasn't the kind of woman who demanded attention. She absorbed it. Every movement was unhurried, deliberate, the slow stirring of her coffee, the way her fingers tapped gently against the ceramic cup, her eyes watching the raindrops chase each other down the glass. There was something fragile about her calm, like she had practiced it for years. I don't know what made me look twice. Maybe it was the way she seemed present yet miles away, as if the world around her was only a whisper. Maybe it was the faint sadness in her posture, straight, elegant, but a little too still. When she finally looked up, our eyes met. Just for a second. It wasn't one of those movie moments where time freezes, no, it was quieter. Real. She looked at me like someone assessing whether I'd break the silence or respect it. I smiled, awkwardly, gently, and said the first thing that came to mind. "You look like you need a friend." For a moment, she didn't react. Then her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady. "I need someone who doesn't just talk." It wasn't sharp. It wasn't unkind. But it was honest, too honest. And it caught me off guard. The words hung between us, mixing with the sound of rain and jazz. I wanted to reply, to ask what she meant, but something in her eyes told me not to. So I nodded, more to myself than to her, and went back to pretending to read. Yet my focus was gone. All I could think about was that one line, someone who doesn't just talk. She stayed there for a while, silent, lost in her thoughts. When she finally stood to leave, she passed close to my table. Her sleeve brushed against my arm, a barely there touch that felt strangely grounding, as if she had left a trace of her quiet behind. Through the fogged window, I watched her step outside. She didn't have an umbrella. The rain soaked her hair, but she didn't hurry. She just walked, slow, steady, unbothered, disappearing into the gray blur of the streetlights. And I sat there, feeling something I couldn't name. It wasn't attraction. Not yet. It was recognition. A quiet pull towards someone who didn't speak much, but somehow made me want to listen. That night, as I walked home, her words echoed in my mind, "I need someone who doesn't just talk." And though I barely knew her, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I'd been waiting for someone like her too. It had been a week since I last saw her, the woman by the window. Yet, her words had a way of replaying themselves at the quietest moments. I need someone who doesn't just talk. Every time I passed that cafe, I half expected to see her again, sitting by the glass, tracing patterns in the rain. But she never was. And I told myself to stop looking. Then, one Thursday evening, I found her again, though not where I expected. I was leaving work late, carrying my laptop bag and a dull ache in my shoulders. The city was already fading into its night rhythm, neon signs flickering, street vendors packing up, the air thick with the scent of rain about to fall. I turned a corner near the old bookstore, and there she was, standing under a flickering street lamp, trying to close her umbrella that had clearly given up the fight. She laughed softly at her own misfortune, and I couldn't help it. I walked over. "You again," I said, my voice a mix of surprise and relief. "Me again," she replied, glancing up with that same calm expression, though her eyes carried a hint of amusement. The umbrella folded at last, though the rain had already won. Her hair clung to her face in soft waves, and tiny droplets sparkled on her lashes. There was no makeup now, no polished poise, just a tired, beautiful honesty. I offered to walk her home. She hesitated, studying me like she wasn't sure if this was kindness or curiosity. Then, after a moment, she nodded. We walked side by side, sharing small silences that felt strangely natural. The city noises softened as we turned onto quieter streets. I asked if she still went to that cafe. Sometimes, she said. When I need to feel invisible. Invisible? People talk too much, she murmured. Sometimes it's nice to just exist somewhere and not be expected to reply. Her words weren't sad, they were simple, matter of fact. And I understood. More than I wanted to admit. At a crosswalk, she paused under the glow of a red light. The rain picked up again, gentle but steady. I held my jacket slightly over her head, and she looked at me, really looked. Her eyes softened. You didn't have to, she said quietly. I know. That's why it matters. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of unspoken things, shared understanding, the fragile comfort of just being seen. When we reached her apartment building, an old brick structure with a flickering hallway light, she turned to face me. You still think I need a friend? Maybe, I said. But I think what you need is someone who listens. And what about you? She asked. Maybe the same thing. For a heartbeat, she smiled, the kind of small, real smile that reaches the eyes. Then she stepped back, her hand brushing lightly against my arm, a gesture of gratitude more than affection. Good night, she whispered. As she disappeared inside, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was connection, quiet, steady, and just beginning to take root. The next time I saw her, it wasn't by accident. She was back at the cafe, the same window seat, the same soft rain outside, like the world was repeating a quiet chapter just for us. Only this time, she noticed me first. There was a small lift of her lips, a subtle acknowledgement, almost as if she'd expected me to show up eventually. I took it as an invitation. Mind if I join you? I asked. She looked at the empty chair across from her, then at me. Only if you don't plan to just talk. It was her way of teasing, I think. But even her teasing carried depth, the kind that made you want to earn her trust one silence at a time. We sat there for a long while without saying much. The cafe had grown quieter, filled only with the steady hum of rain against the glass. She was reading a paperback, her fingers tracing the edges of the page absent-mindedly. I was nursing a coffee I didn't really taste, trying to memorize the small things, how the corners of her eyes crinkled when she smiled at something she read, how the lamplight caught in her hair like faint amber. Eventually, she closed her book and said, "You're different." Different how? You don't fill the air just because it's empty. That stayed with me. We started meeting there more often, never planned, yet always somehow expected. Sometimes we talked about nothing, books, music, the weather. Other times, she'd ask quiet questions that lingered longer than they should. Do you ever feel like you're running out of yourself? She asked once. I didn't answer right away. Every day, I said finally. She smiled sadly, like she understood exactly what that meant. There were moments when words stopped entirely, when silence became the language between us. One afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled in suddenly, and she flinched at the sound. Instinctively, I reached out, just a hand over hers. Warm. Steady. Her fingers tightened slightly, and she didn't pull away. We stayed like that, her eyes on our joined hands, mine on her trembling breath. When the thunder eased, she whispered, "You have a calming way about you." And you, I said softly, have a way of making silence feel safe. She laughed quietly, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her. And it was beautiful. After that day, the way she looked at me changed, softer, a little searching. When she spoke, there was warmth behind every word, like she had stopped guarding her tone. And when I left the cafe that evening, she said something that made me pause at the door. I don't let people stay long in my life. But somehow, I don't want you to leave yet. I turned back. She wasn't looking at me, just at her cup, but the vulnerability in her voice said everything. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets still shimmered under the amber glow of streetlights. I remember thinking that some people don't enter your life loudly, they appear softly, like rain at dusk, and somehow, they never leave the same way. It was late, later than either of us intended to stay. The cafe had already dimmed its lights, and the staff were politely pretending not to notice we hadn't left yet. Outside, the rain had begun again, a soft drizzle that tapped rhythmically against the windows. She sat across from me, absently tracing a drop of condensation down her cup, her thoughts clearly somewhere else. She looked tired. Not in the physical sense, but in that deeper, quieter way that comes from carrying too much for too long. I wanted to ask if she was all right, but something told me not to fill the silence with questions she wasn't ready to answer. So instead, I waited, just listening to the hum of rain and the faint music floating through the speakers. After a while, she said, almost to herself, "It's strange how easy it is to talk to you when I've spent years learning how not to." Her voice trembled, just slightly. I looked at her, but she kept her eyes on her hands, delicate, fidgeting with her ring as if unsure whether to take it off or keep it on. "I used to think being strong meant never letting anyone see me fall apart," she said. "But lately, I just feel tired of holding everything together." There was nothing to say to that. So I reached across the table, slow, unhurried, and covered her hand with mine. The contact was gentle, patient. Her skin was cool, her pulse unsteady. She didn't pull away. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she looked up, her eyes shining under the dim light, not from tears yet, but close. "You really don't talk much, do you?" "Only when it matters," I said quietly. She smiled, the faintest curve of her lips, then exhaled, like she'd been holding that breath for years. When we stepped out into the night, the rain had softened into a mist. She hesitated near the corner. "Do you walk home this way?" she asked. "I do now." The street was almost empty, only the occasional car passing through the puddles, scattering small waves of reflected light. She walked beside me, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. Every now and then, our shoulders brushed, light, accidental touches that somehow carried meaning neither of us spoke aloud. At her building, she stopped and turned to me. The air was cold, her breath visible in small clouds. "You don't have to wait," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "But maybe I want to." That made her look away for a moment, then back at me. Her eyes were gentler now, less guarded, as if she was finally allowing someone to see the fragile truth beneath her composure. "You're kind," she murmured. "That's rare." "No," I said. "I just notice." And then she did something unexpected. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of rain in her hair. She rested her forehead lightly against my shoulder, not for long, just a breath, just enough. "Thank you," she whispered. No grand gestures, no promises. Just that, a quiet surrender, a small moment of trust from a woman who'd spent years keeping her heart under lock and key. As she disappeared into the building, I stood there for a while, feeling the echo of her touch, the quiet warmth that lingers when someone finally lets you in. A few days passed before I saw her again. I didn't want to push, didn't want to be the kind of man who mistook quiet for invitation. But the truth is, I missed her, not the conversations, but the stillness we shared. The kind that said more than words ever could. When she finally called, her voice was softer than usual. "Can you come by? I just don't feel like being alone tonight." No explanation. None needed. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with books and soft light. The scent of rain drifted in from a half-open window, mingling with something faintly floral, maybe her perfume, maybe just the way the night felt around her. She stood barefoot in the living room, wearing an oversized sweater, her hair loosely tied back. She looked human. Unarmored. I set the coffee cups on the table, and for a while, we didn't speak. She sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, staring at nothing in particular. Then she said it quietly, almost like she was afraid of breaking something fragile between us. You ever build a life around someone, only to realize it wasn't really yours? I stayed silent. I knew this wasn't a question that needed answering. She looked down, twisting her fingers together. My marriage ended 3 years ago. Everyone says I left. But truth is, I just stopped pretending I was happy. There was no bitterness in her tone, only exhaustion. The kind that comes after a long storm. He wasn't a bad man, she continued. Just distant. And I learned to fill silence with strength, to wear smiles like armor. But after a while, I couldn't remember which ones were real. She let out a slow breath and looked at me, as if to gauge whether I'd start offering pity. I didn't. I just listened. You know what scared me most? She asked. The idea that I might never feel safe with someone again. That I'd always be waiting for the other person to leave first. Her voice trembled slightly, and she pressed her lips together, fighting the emotion rising behind them. Without thinking, I moved closer, not too close, just enough that our knees nearly touched. You don't have to rush to trust anyone, I said quietly. Least of all me. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, her face buried in her hands. A quiet sob escaped her, not loud, not broken, just real. I didn't speak. I didn't touch her right away. I just sat there beside her, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Eventually, she reached for me, her hand finding mine in the space between us. Her fingers trembled, but she held on, tight, as if anchoring herself. You don't know how long it's been since I let someone see me like this, she whispered. I squeezed her hand lightly. Then maybe it's time someone did. She looked up, eyes glassy but softer now. There was gratitude there, quiet, unspoken, but strong. In that moment, I realized it wasn't about romance. Not yet. It was about trust. About someone finally feeling safe enough to stop pretending. And maybe, just maybe, that was where love really began. The days that followed felt quieter, not empty, just full in a different way. We'd fallen into a rhythm without even realizing it. A text here, a coffee there, short visits that stretched into long evenings. It was never planned, never discussed. We simply showed up for each other. She'd begun to smile more, those small, unguarded smiles that reached the eyes. Sometimes she'd laugh at something trivial, then look almost embarrassed for letting joy slip through. I'd pretend not to notice, but I did. Every time. That evening, she invited me over again. The rain had returned, drumming softly against her window. She was curled up on the couch, a blanket over her lap, a half-read book on the coffee table. The lamps cast a warm, amber light that made the room feel safe, like time had slowed down just for us. We talked about small things at first, her work, my week, the new cafe that opened across town. But under every word was a current neither of us dared to name. After a while, she leaned her head back against the couch and sighed. You ever wish life had warning signs? Something that tells you when you're getting too close to something you might lose? I smiled softly. Maybe that's how we know it's real, when it scares us a little. She turned her head toward me, studying my face in the dim light. Her gaze lingered, not searching, not questioning, just there. Present. You say things like that, she murmured, and I start to forget why I built walls in the first place. For a moment, silence stretched between us, that fragile kind that teeters between comfort and confession. The only sound was the rain, soft and steady, filling the room with its rhythm. I don't remember who moved first, but somehow we were sitting closer. My arm rested along the back of the couch, her shoulder just beneath it. She didn't pull away. Instead, she shifted slightly, her head finding its place against my chest, tentative, testing, but real. Her hair brushed against my chin, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and rain. I could feel the steady beat of her heartbeat through the layers of fabric, and I wondered if she could feel mine too, uneven, betraying every calm word I'd ever said. "This feels dangerous," she whispered. "In a good way. In a way that makes me forget the rules I made for myself." Her hand rested lightly on my chest, fingers tracing the edge of my shirt. Not in desire, in reassurance. Like she was confirming that I was real, that this quiet between us wasn't imagined. I wanted to tell her how I felt. How every look, every silence, every accidental touch had started to mean more than I could admit. But the words caught somewhere between my throat and my heart. She looked up at me then, eyes soft, searching, uncertain. For a heartbeat, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for one of us to cross that invisible line. But she was the one who broke the silence. "Maybe we should just stay like this," she said gently. "No labels. No promises. Just this." And she rested her head back against me. I didn't argue. I just held her, quiet, steady, pretending not to feel the ache of everything we almost said. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Inside, our silence deepened, not empty, but full of everything we weren't ready to confess. The next morning, the city woke to sunlight for the first time in weeks. The rain had finally passed, leaving the streets glazed with gold. I walked to the cafe, more out of habit than hope, half expecting not to see her there. But she was, sitting by the same window, that same cup between her hands, the light catching her hair like it had been waiting just for her. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, everything else in the room faded, the noise, the chatter, the world outside. Just her, and that small, knowing smile that said she'd been expecting me. "You're late," she teased softly. "You never said what time," I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "I didn't have to. You always show up eventually." It was simple, but something in her tone made my chest tighten, that quiet certainty, that unspoken trust. We didn't talk much that morning. Maybe we didn't need to anymore. There was a calm between us now, a kind of peace that comes only after storms, the kind where two people don't need to fill silence to feel close. After a while, she said, "I've been thinking a lot about what this is." I waited, not wanting to break her rhythm. "You've been kind to me," she continued. "And I don't want you to think it hasn't meant something. It has. More than I can say." She looked down at her cup, her fingers tightening around it. "But I also know myself. I know I'm still learning how to be alone without feeling lonely. And if I start depending on you too much, I'll lose the part of me I'm trying to rebuild." Her honesty didn't hurt. It humbled me. "You don't owe me anything," I said quietly. "Not answers. Not promises. Just honesty. And you've already given me that." She looked at me for a long time, eyes shining with something that wasn't quite sadness. More like gratitude. Maybe even love, in its gentlest form. "You always listen like you mean it," she whispered. "Do you know how rare that is?" I smiled. "Maybe that's my problem. I feel too much in the spaces people leave empty." She reached across the table then, her fingers brushing against mine, slow, deliberate. Her thumb traced the back of my hand once, softly, before settling there. It wasn't a gesture of passion. It was something deeper, a quiet acknowledgement of everything we'd shared, and everything we wouldn't. "If life were kinder," she said, "maybe we'd have met at a time when neither of us was still healing." "Maybe," I said. "But maybe this, us, was never about timing. Maybe it was about finding someone who reminded us we could still feel." Her smile trembled then, warm and sad all at once. She leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek, light, fleeting, like the touch of sunlight after rain. "Thank you," she murmured. "For not just talking." And with that, she stood, gathering her things. I watched her leave, not with ache this time, but with quiet understanding. Some people don't come into your life to stay. They come to teach you gentleness, to remind you that care can exist without possession, that love doesn't always need to be spoken aloud to be real. As she disappeared into the bright morning, I whispered to myself, some love stories aren't meant to be loud. They're meant to stay quiet, but last forever. And somehow, that felt like enough. If this story touched something in you, maybe you've been someone's quiet place too. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story with someone who believes love doesn't always need grand gestures, just presence. This was, I said, you look like you need a friend. She replied, I need someone who doesn't just talk. I'll see you in the next story, where silence, once again, might say everything.